Go to TonyPerkins.com. Earlier today, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, also known as USCIRF, released its 2022 annual report documenting global developments and trends related to religious freedom during the year 2021. The report by the independent bipartisan commission, which I currently serve as commissioner, is designed to provide recommendations to enhance the U.S. government's promotion of religious freedom or belief abroad. Well, joining me now in studio to discuss the new report is the chair of USCIRF, Nadine Maenza. Nadine, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, so let's talk about this. 15 countries recommended as countries of particular concern. So let's start with a definition of, we use these terms here. In fact, we were talking about this today at the commission hearing. Me and I think it was either Nuri Turkel, vice chair, or Anurima Bhargava, another one of our commissioners. We were talking about how we just throw around these acronyms.
Right.
And people are like, what is that?
CPC.
So a CPC, a country of particular concern, what is it?
So it is a country designated by the State Department as meeting, according to the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, or IRFA, we call it, that for countries that engage in or tolerate religious freedom violations that meet the definition of systematic, ongoing, and egregious violations of religious freedom.
So that is
the top tier.
That is a defined term, and so there are behaviors that fall under that would put a country into that category.
Exactly. And it's really a country that engages in these activities or tolerates it.
So
it's
when
important.
we're talking about tolerate, for instance, let's just take, for instance, a country that you and I care about, that the commission spent a lot of time talking about, Nigeria. Now, the Nigerian government is not necessarily engaging in this ongoing systematic and egregious violation. I mean, there's some examples of it, but more than anything else, they're tolerating it.
Right. They are tolerating, looking away at the violence that's happening, not intervening. One of the richest countries in Africa, the most populous country in Africa, they have the means, the ability to stand up against these atrocities are happening, to do something about it, and they're not. But I would say that the state governments are meeting the definition of egregious, ongoing, and systematic by enforcing blasphemy laws.
Right.
And so you're seeing a
point.
state government-led CPC status activities, and then you're also seeing.
But when we issue a report, it's focused on countries and not states of countries. So we hold Nigeria as the national government accountable for what's happening at the state level.
Do. Exactly, and they can't claim they don't have the ability, which is what they're saying. They don't have the ability to stop the violence, but it doesn't appear that they're using all the different ways they could to stop the violence and doing anything at all to move forward.
Now, this has been a country of particular concern for USCIRF commissioners across the board. Now, let me just, I know our viewers and listeners are fairly familiar with USCIRF. We talk about it on a fairly regular basis, but there are 9 commissioners, I think 8 right now, because we're down 1 or 2?
We're down 1.
Down 1.
Yep.
So we have 8 commissioners. It's bipartisan. And it's been very interesting in my 4 years on the commission. We have individuals of very different backgrounds, religiously, politically, ideologically, but we have for 4 years been focused I would say, there's been no daylight really between us when it comes to these issues of religious freedom. And in fact, again, on this issue of Nigeria, in the last year of the Trump administration, they took our recommendation that we've been making since 2009, that this be a country of particular concern. They declared it a CPC only last year to have it removed completely from any of the list. And the commission, with one voice, has spoken out expressing concern about that.
It's stunning that they didn't just move it down to the special watch list, which is for the countries that meet 2 but not 3 of those, that CPC test, is they removed it entirely, which indicates, according to IRFA, the law, that there are no severe religious.
And that's never happened before.
No, it never happened.
In 20 years, or 22 years, that's never happened before. So
saying that there are no severe religious freedom violations. So, that is a mistake, and it's important that we continue to fight to put that back on, and that there be consequence for Nigeria.
Well, give us some of the examples of what's just happened in recent weeks there in Nigeria. This is ongoing. We hardly go through a week without hearing some attack on a church, a mosque, some pastor that's been abducted and held for ransom.
Right. I know that I know over a dozen attacks on houses of worship, 13 religious leaders kidnapped for ransom, priests, pastors, imams that are more moderate are even targeted. So we're seeing even the Muslim community that isn't going along with some of these Islamist ideas. And, January has been a horrible month for Nigeria. So we don't even cover that period yet. So things even this year already.
This is last year, you're right.
Are already moving in a bad trajectory. So it's really important that the United States steps up and starts using the levers they have to push back on Nigeria and to demand that they move in a different direction and start holding these perpetrators accountable.
So some of the other 15 countries, China on the list that we talk about frequently, North Korea, another bad actor. Right. What are some of the other countries?
Sure. Eritrea, which is one of the only CPC country that had some positive trajectory this year. It was pretty small, but they released quite a few religious prisoners, and they actually held a meeting with commissioners at USCIRF last summer and started engaging with us. So we did see some positive engagement, and we'll welcome that anytime we see that and hope for more. Of course, Iran continues to be a harsh country for religious minorities, going particularly this year after Baha'is and Christians with a lot of arrests and violence against them, and is important that we use all our levers again with Iran and use, I know the U.S. has a tough relationship with them, but they also have a lot of allies that have good relationships with Iran that we could also count on to stand up for religious freedom and to push them to intervene for those that are being arrested because of their faith.
What other countries have we seen kind of, a lot of the countries of these 15, it's just kind of status quo, kind of the same from last year, but are there some countries where things have gotten worse?
Most of the countries in our report have gotten worse, actually, and the ones that stayed the same are countries like North Korea and Iran that were already among the worst in the world, so they stayed among the worst in the world. So we have, unfortunately, seen things trending in the wrong direction. We have had some bright spots, though, and I've been told that in previous years with these USCIRF reports, it's all been negative and there haven't been any bright spots. So the fact that we have countries like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, working to move towards religious freedom. Last reporting cycle, we took off Bahrain. They've stayed off our report. So we
took Sudan off, too. Now, unfortunately, they've, with the military coup, we're watching
worried
that
about
carefully.
How things will go for them, of course. And so, and of course, the Central African Republic we'd taken off,
right.
And now we put them back on again because of the government themselves have been engaging in crimes like killing, kidnapping.
And Egypt is a country, we're recommended for a tier 2 or second, the watch list. In years past, in the last few years, they've been making progress, but just not getting over the top.
Right. They were one of the few that was a positive that made a trajectory. They released some prisoners. They showed some openings, some positive actions. And, of course, they engage with us. And like you said, we've seen this potential right. in Egypt.
And President el-Sisi, who I've met with a couple of times, I think he is genuine. And I think from his religious background, I think he understands a little bit about persecution, and I think he is trying to be more open in Egypt, and he's made some really strong symbolic gestures, but it just hasn't filtered down into their policies and laws.
It hasn't, and what we're seeing is so many of these countries, and a lot of the advisors around him and people in government, they have this belief that if you clamp down on government, you keep things safer. Or religious communities, it'll keep things safer. If you make it so that nothing changes, it'll be less. And that's the opposite of actually.
Well, let's talk about that, Nadine Maenza. I want to talk about that because we spend a lot of time talking about religious freedom, both domestically and in our foreign policy. Why does it matter? What
right.
difference does it make? It goes beyond a lot more than just an individual's ability to worship as they choose. That has ramifications for a lot of different areas of society.
It does, and countries that have religious freedom tend to be more peaceful, more stable, and you're seeing like a country like Syria where religious freedom has never been at the table for Syria, went in U.S. policy in Syria. So you end up with a political solution that has no legitimacy with the people, because religious freedom is interconnected with all the other rights. And so if you're not prioritizing religious freedom, there's a very good chance there are no other human rights being prioritized. And you have a situation where there is no way forward to have the legitimacy of the people, that you need those kind of conditions. So it's in the U.S.'s best interest, even if we're only thinking about ourselves, and this is not even thinking about the people that get to practice their faith. It helps us to have better allies, to have a more peaceful countries to interact with. So it's in our best interest for us to be advocating for these kind of changes.
I mean, there is now kind of very robust studies that show the connection between religious freedom, as you made reference to, economic stability, social stability, and domestic tranquility. And so, as you said, if a country is more stable, like for instance, Ukraine, and what we see happening there, I think, in fact, we've talked about this on the program, I think that was a part of the incentive that Putin had to move on Ukraine, because Ukraine had embraced religious freedom and tolerance, and that was beginning to benefit the country.
Right, and he didn't want to see them successful. And in the areas that Russia had already invaded, like Donbass and Crimea, you'd already seen a deterioration, removing religious freedom. Only the Russian Orthodox Church could practice, and some of the religious leaders had even been killed in some of those areas. So you're definitely seeing Russia bringing with them some horrific conditions that if those spread, it's going to affect.
This is no newsflash to USCIRF that's been recommending CPC status for Russia for quite some time now.
And last year was one of the best surprises, is when the U.S. government answered our recommendation for years by adding Russia to the CPC list. So that's a new addition for them.
Because, some of you kind of get stuck in these time warps where you go back and, after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the opening of Eastern Europe, you began to see religious freedom spread. And a lot of people, in the United States, you had missionaries going over there, you had people over there, it was religious freedom. That door has slammed shut, and you've seen behind that door now for the last decade very aggressive religious intolerance taking place toward religious minorities, and now that's being exported across their border into Ukraine. And any place that Russia's foot steps is going to bring this religious intolerance.
And we're also seeing them change the laws to make it harder for religious communities to practice their faith, making it harder to register churches, made it harder for people to come in from foreigners to help with religious communities. So, we're seeing it on the harassment side, but you're also seeing on the legal side, which really institutionalizes these kind of violations. So,
Nadine, I'm going to ask you a question kind of separate from the 2022 report. And by the way, folks, I believe we have a link at the website, tonyperkins.com. If you like some nice reading, you can read our annual report. In fact, we've changed the report over the last 4 years to make it more concise, and it's each country is about 2 pages.
Right, about 1,800 words.
Yeah, so we've kind of reduced it down so you can get the kind of the meat of it and see where these particular countries stand on religious freedom. So if you like that, you can actually download a PDF of it. But the question I want to ask you, Nadine, you and I have served simultaneously on the commission. We both roll off in May. What's been your greatest, I guess, surprise and the greatest thing that has brought you satisfaction serving on the commission?
Wow. I think one of the greatest surprises, well, first of all, the bipartisan work we've done together has to be the highlight in how in Washington, D.C. we can sit by Democrats, people with different beliefs, and all, like you said, with no daylight between us, fight for these causes. I think I never understood how difficult it was for the U.S. government to hold their allies accountable. And that seems to be the hardest nut to crack in some respects when you think of countries like Turkey, like India, like Egypt. It's the administration's always pull back away from holding them accountable because it's harder. And I think the other thing I've learned being here is seeing the limitations of government, like government to government interaction, USCIRF to government interaction. It's a powerful and sometimes a necessary thing. but it's not sufficient. You have to have civil society. And you look at a place like Egypt, you need to have people working in the communities to explain, to educate why religious freedom matters, to help change the conditions on the ground. And so it's really a combination. In northeast Syria, they changed religious freedom conditions on the ground. It wasn't just top down, it was top down and bottom up. Right. And so I think you have to have both of those things going on, which you do right now in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. So places like that where you're seeing changes, you're seeing it from bottom up, top down. And that to me was a kind of a realization from sitting where I do.
Yeah, it just, government moves at the rate of molasses. It just
you can't
moves
just
so
wait
slow.
for government. You've got to move without it. That's right.
Nadine, always great to talk with you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And